Our last presenter this morning is Julien Schuh. Julien is professor of French literature at the University Paris-Nanterre and deputy director of MSH Mons. He co-leads the consortium HN pictorIA that I talked about earlier today, dedicated to the application of artificial intelligence tools in the field of visual culture with the humanities and social sciences. Julien published extensively on AI, and I especially recommend the special issue of Société et Représentation that he edited in 2023 with Laurence Danguy, entitled L'œil numérique, or The Digital Eyes. As I mentioned earlier, Julien is a main partner in the organization of this conference. The title of his lecture today is Visual Heritage in the Age of Foundation Models, Public Commons versus Private Extraction. Please join me in welcoming Julien.
Thank you so much, Thierry. Thank you so much to everyone at the IMC for organizing this event. I know it's already noon. I'm going to try to be not too abstract, but I'm sorry, I am an abstract type of guy, so okay. I'm not going to tell you stories. I'm going to talk about concept and political issues around AI, particularly. So in the introduction, I wanted to tackle the issue of who gives meaning to data. We live today in a mass of digital images, not only billions of images generated by our smartphones, surveillance camera, or in-car cameras, but also an ever-growing body of images from the past that have been digitized and are now accessible on completely new scale. It is precisely this mass of images, this human visual heritage, that interests me today, and in particular, not so much the images themselves, but the actions that they make possible, the narratives they enable, the identities they transform, the attention they divert. And today, the pressing issue, one that is essentially political, is the control over the circulation, the interpretation, and the use of human culture through tools that are becoming all-powerful mechanisms for managing knowledge, which are AI models. And I will focus in particular on the relationship between public and private forces in the management of this heritage, which must also be considered as a form of capital, a capital of collective memory. And to illustrate this reflection, I will start with a recent example that Christopher mentioned before. For nearly 30 years, the French National Library, the BNF, has been engaged in digitizing and providing access to both the textual and graphic cultural heritage it preserves. And this initiative takes two forms, essentially. On the one hand, there is Gallica, which is a digital library that allows access to more than 10 million documents. Gallica was born largely as a reaction to Google Books, aiming to offer access to French textual heritage without being subject to the selection, the distribution, and the monetization logics of a private American actor at a time when Google was negotiating agreements to digitize and publish collections of books with hundreds of university and public libraries. And so on the other end, you have a less visible form of distribution for the general public, which is the BNF APIs, so programmable interfaces that allow access to the data and metadata that have been put online. And this paves the way for the massive use of billions of data points that have been accumulated and produced over decades, for some over hundreds of years, by thousands of conservators and archivists across multiple generations. So here we have access to the work and the knowledge that has been created over decades by thousands and thousands of people. And all of this is produced within a framework of open science and knowledge commons. These are data that are reusable, but simply making data available is not enough. As Régis Debris reminds us, I will not read this long excerpt, because the archive within the institution is awaiting a new contextualization that gives it meaning. This is, as I said before, a political question. It's about determining which actor will become the main vectors for the transmission of knowledge, who will give meaning to this data. And for now, private companies like Google, Meta, or OpenAI are at the forefront to become the collective interpreters of open data. We have indeed seen the development over the past 15 years of data capture and analysis strategies on human culture on a previously unimaginable scale among the tech giants. In the case of the French National Library, the BNF, over the past few months, we have observed data siphoning campaigns using the BNF APIs, what Christopher was mentioning before, conducted by companies with IP addresses based in California. And the BNF server were not designed to handle such extensive data collection, and engineers had to quickly implement technical measures to limit this access, as the overuse threatened the stability of the servers. And the core issue is that the open science framework actually enables this type of use. According to Elinor Ostrom, the commons of knowledge rely on the principle that collective knowledge should be maintained by the very actors who use it. However, the data capture practices we are witnessing today follow a free rider logic. Companies that stand to benefit from the collective memory do not contribute to its production or upkeep, nor do they reinvest the information back into the public domain. Instead, they develop proprietary models trained massively on this publicly available data. And moreover, the models produced through this process depends on selection, structuring, and distribution that are not subject to any collective negotiation by the communities directly impacted by them. So I wanted to talk today a little about the issue of artificial memories and how the large artificial intelligence model are transforming the processes of collective memory and the political consequences of the struggle between public and private logics in the control of this collective memory capital, especially in the context of visual memory. So to begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about foundation models and start with a quick reminder of what we call foundation model, meaning large language model or visual models that are tools that serve to encode text, images, and now also sound, for example, to produce synthetic representation of human culture. I'll be focusing on the relationship between collective memory and artificial intelligence by narrowing it down to the question of visual memory, as I said before, by addressing the question of what are large vision models. The large vision models are AI models trained to produce synthetic representation of visual culture. How were these models trained? They were trained on a certain conception of what is human visual culture, in fact, based on data sets that have, over the years, some for over decades, been curated, standardized, and structured by various teams and communities. One of the key data sets used to train visual AI models is ImageNet, which contains over 1 million images divided into 1,000 different classes, and each class includes a set of labeled images and are served notably in competitions where different algorithms and tools were tested to achieve state-of-the-art performances in classification, object recognition tasks, and so on. And so ImageNet is not just a data set, it's also a collection of practices, a community, and a competition framework that has established a set of protocols to define what machine vision is and how globally, as a community, we would tackle this challenge. It's in fact a very solutionist way of treating visual culture, that is, treating visual culture as a series of problems that have to be solved. And from around 2017 or 2018, people said that ImageNet has solved, in fact, the problem of image segmentation or classification, for example. So we've basically decided that the problem of visual culture has been solved. This large dataset have made it possible to train large language and vision models, models like CLIP, DALI, or Stable Diffusion that we mentioned before, which are multimodal models, meaning that they work with both text and images. They encode, on one hand, textual information that can be linked to an image. For instance, if there's an annotation on an image that says this is an Australian Shepherd, the text is encoded in a neural network. The image itself is also encoded by another system, and the two are combined. Textual annotation and visual information are aligned to form a global semantic representation of the object. These models are trained on very large corpora, millions upon millions of images. As I mentioned, ImageNet, one of the most widely used datasets, contains more than 1.2 million images, but models like CLIP, also developed by OpenAI, or DALI, or Stable Diffusion, are trained on much larger datasets. CLIP was trained on 400 million text-image pairs, which is an enormous visual mass. Stable Diffusion was trained on 5 billion text-image pairs. That means 5 billion images collected from across the internet, representing a vast synthetic snapshot of human visual culture as digitized and made accessible online. These images provide a synthetic representation of that knowledge, the global visual culture, in order to generate new images or to process them. Now, what interests me in these models isn't so much their generative capabilities, but the fact that they have become actionable synthetic representation, a kind of operational memory of human visual culture. They are less artificial intelligence models than artificial memory models, because they encode information about our culture, information that has become usable. And this is maybe a key aspect of what memory really is. It's not just data that's stored and preserved, it's data that can be acted upon, that can be used to generate something or to perform a task. And this distinguishes data storage from collective memory. And this memory is not just usable by human, it is increasingly agentive itself. We are now seeing the rise of AI agents that can propose strategies and solve problems autonomously, and humans are no longer necessarily the primary agents. And this agency is distributed, and some of it lies with non-human agents that, philosophically speaking, act on their own. Alors, as for all this work, very briefly, during training, these AI models develop virtual neurons. This neuron metaphor is a bit misleading, but essentially the model aggregates information about recognized patterns in the datasets and the frequency of a relation between objects in the datasets. And this is a statistical form of memory. That is, the information they extract from visual culture isn't a copy or an archive of the original images. It's not like traditional preservation logic, which involves storing permanent traces that remain stable over time and could be reactivated as needed. This is something else entirely, a form of aggregative analogical synthesis, where the model absorbed vast amounts of input data and built statistical representation of the relationship between the objects in the data. These can then be used to generate new images or content based on new stimuli. To give you an example, a neuron in a model might react to Donald Trump. That is the neuron that can determine whether an image shows Trump or not. And research has shown that after being trained on a vast amount of news imagery, this model built a composite representation of what Trump is. And Trump is not just a face, but it's also the term MAGA, the color orange, fascist symbols, and so on. So in the model, Donald Trump is not just a face, it's a network of associated elements. And when these elements show up together, the neuron activates. And that's what's so fascinating about how these models encode information. The data points aren't isolated, they are embedded in interconnected networks. And this analogical aggregation process becomes very visible when using image generation models like DALI 3 here, which was OpenAI's most powerful image generator until really recently, where they released a new version. And when you ask it to generate, for example, an image of Serge Gainsbourg and France Gall, two pop culture references in the French music scene, it doesn't just give you portraits. It synthesizes a whole iconography of 1960s France. You'll see specific elements of framing, staging, props like cigarettes and guitars, miniskirts, defining facial feature or hairstyles, posture, and so on. And even the materiality of the media of this period. The results look like posters or photographs from the 60s. It recreates the cultural context and visual cues of that time period. what becomes clear is that these images don't really represent Serge Gainsbourg and France Gall, but rather a sort of conceptualization of the yeye artist, male or female. What interests me is that the ability of this model to generate such images gives us a way to explore the latent space of human visual culture as represented by the training corpora. This invites us to think of large language and vision models as new kind of memory spaces. You might remember what the art of memory was. It was a rhetorical skill in the ancient ages, a kind of technique used, for example, by lawyers or orators, which involved mentally building a memory palace, imaginary house or building in which various items will be placed, and these items served as symbolic markers, emotionally charged images representing the key points of a speech designed to be easily remembered and activated. So memorizing a speech meant metaphorically mapping each part of it to a vivid image and then placing these images in specific location within the imaging palace. You would then recall your speech by mentally walking through the palace and encountering the object in every location, which would trigger the associated content. In a similar way, these AI models are like memory palaces. The data they are trained on has been restructured into a dense, interconnected, analogical space, and just like ancient memory palaces, the navigation through this space is crucial. But now this navigation is no longer done through human memory, it's done through prompts. A prompt is a way of locating a point in this encoded memory space. So when you say to ChatGPT, generate an image of a cat scratching a carpet, it translates that prompt into a vector point in the model's latent space, and it generates an image from there. And there's a metaphor that I really like from François Chollet, an AI expert, who said that using these models is like being a photographer. When you use a prompt, you're taking a snapshot of a specific point within the latent space. The prompt is like a lens, and the image is the photo you take from that focus point. So when we use these models, what we're really doing is searching for the best point, the best prompt, the best way to produce the image or the result or the output that we're looking for, and thereby we are exploring the latent space that has been built from all this cultural data. Now, obviously, the very structure of these large memory models has deep implication for how we remember the past and how we collectively interact with it, especially since these models are already embedded in the tools that you use every day, like your smartphone. To better understand the consequences of encoding information about the past in AI models, we must even reconsider what we mean by image and data. When images are generated from a model trained on millions of old images, what we get are not really images nor capta. The relationship between the visualization produced by a visual AI model and the training data is extremely diluted. Johanna Drucker famously argued against the use of the term data, preferring the concept of capta. All data are the result of an act of observation, and we construct the very object that we observe by the way we frame our observation. In the same way, we should give another name to the information that exists as weights in model. I propose the term engrammata, a form of statistical diffusion of information that account for the distribution of objects within a corpus, which we have great difficulty in conceptualizing. And the results of the prompts that produce images could be called generata, a term that would distinguish them from traditional images. An image, as conceived in visual culture, is a stable trace that retains the logic of the imprint. It is the product of a series of material interaction that can be traced back to a source. For example, a published photograph can be linked to the matrix that printed it, which in turn can be traced back to an original plate produced by light rays reflected off an object. When we look at a photograph, we interpret it by reconstructing that entire chain, recreating the context of the shot that made its production possible. We reassemble a representation of the world that renders its existence possible. Yet images generated by AI do not adhere at all to this logic. Sorry. The logic of the imprint. They are produced from noise. They create an effect through a sleight of hand, an obfuscation of their origin, inviting the viewer, much like a trompe-l'œil, to produce an interpretation of an original production scene as if the image were an imprint. And here you got a real image of France Gall and Serge Gainsbourg, and you've got the image created by AI. I would say that this, in fact, on the right, is not an image. This is something completely different. But since we are a human used to seeing photographs, we interpret it as a photograph. Because the generator are, in fact, false imprint, simulated traces. These models work because we are, in our very nature as humans, inclined to believe that the images we see belong to the traditional visual spectrum and represents the structure of the world as it exists. And so when we see an image that resembles a photograph, we assume it is a trace, that is the indicia of the image that points to something that once existed and allow us both to understand and to see, to interpret the picture. But the images produced by these large models have nothing to do with the structure of reality, its indicia, or the fact that they are forms of representation. They are simply statistical representation of a set of visual data. And understanding the difference between capta and generator allow us to grasp the chasm that separates our relationship to the past through archival images and our relationship to the past mediated by large visual model. The main point I wanted to raise about the impact of these AI models on collective memory, particularly visual human memory, is the impact of AI on the distribution of knowledge and the capture of memory capital. We entered the realm of what some have termed digital extractivism, because these models convert cultural heritage into a kind of memory capital by transforming vast amounts of cultural data into resources that can be mobilized, repurposed, and monetized. At its core, collective memory functions as a form of process that conserves the past states of human societies. In human society, collective memory plays a crucial role in the distribution of traces that allow us to navigate our cultural and historical landscape. Collective memory is not just history. It is how societies construct and transmit the past. It has a social function. Our memory is not just personal. It is shaped by communities through interaction, tradition, institution that help us recall and transmit the past. It has a social function, a political function. For example, nation-states, corporations, and interest groups use memory strategically to construct narratives that support specific identities and ideology. It also has, for example, a democratic function. Memory is about accountability, preserving evidence of collective action, governance, and historical injustices, for example. And what is really strange and fascinating with human collective memory, as Leroy-Gourhan famously noted, is that one of the essential material facts of humanity is this unique ability to place one's memory outside oneself, embedding it within the social organism. There is a form of latent knowledge present in society, as illustrated in this comic strip by Zach Winnersmith, that said that for human societies, there are no single humans knows how to make anything. The information is latent in the organizational structure. So collective memory is not static. It is a dynamic process distributed across multiple systems of information management, from libraries to digital platforms, from oral traditions to artificial intelligence. And today, however, we see a significant shift, because for centuries, librarians, historians, museums managed collective memory. And today, AI is taking over this role. It is fundamentally reshaping how we document, store, and engage with history. The latent information produced by billions of interactions can be extracted through the training of foundation model. The knowledge that was distributed, that needed a collective effort to be stored and reused, is now concentrated in AI models that act as sites of memory. This model redefined the way we think about this distribution of knowledge. They are both local, they synthesize a huge amount of data in a single model, and they are global because they are connected to platforms and interfaces that make them globally available. Everyone can use ChatGPT because everyone has a smartphone, and ChatGPT is on every smartphone on the planet. And so we are seeing a new form of this dynamic raises critical question about the management of knowledge commons. As Elinor Ostrom and Charlotte S. have shown, the issue of free riders, those who benefit from resources without contributing to their maintenance, is central to the governance of any commons. We now see a similar problem with companies that harvest data they did not produce to train models that are then closed off from public access. I will not read this excerpt, but this is particularly true about the data available through API. For example, the data that I talked about from the BNF. We can see the training of private models as a new form of enclosure. Large AI models can be seen as embodying a kind of Uberization of global memory production. There are new tools for capturing and accumulating capital, transforming collective memory into assets that can be extracted, commodified, and controlled. But we must not only consider the visual information that is exploited in this way. What is stored in these AI models today is as much the visual information contained in the images as all the practices surrounding them. That is what we do with the images. This is a form of intangible dimension that includes, for example, the way we interact with images, the time we spent viewing them, the frequency of likes that we put on social media, the propensity to share on social networks, our comments and annotation, and so on. Jonathan Martineau and Jonathan Durand-Folco call all this information an algorithmic capital, the transformation of our actions into data. It is no longer just about preserving images, it's about capturing the entire chain of action and transmitted knowledge that are produced in our society. And for the first time, large-scale digital traceability makes actionable what was previously considered intangible heritage. I think I will skip this part and just finish on the question of the governance of the AI model. Big tech companies are aware of the social implication of all these models, and they are starting to address these concerns. OpenAI, for instance, shared thoughts on their blog in May 2023 titled Governance of Superintelligence. But such statement, when they say we believe people around the world should democratically decide on the bounds and defaults for AI system. We don't yet know how to design such a mechanism, but we plan to experiment with its development. We continue to think that within these wide bounds, individual users should have a lot of control over how the AI they use behaves. However, such statements, as of now, seem more about managing public perception than truly establishing robust, accountable frameworks for these technologies. An alternative vision for governing these collective memory agents might be inspired by projects such as Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a kind of collective memory repository. It thrives on collaboration, fact-checking, maintaining neutrality, fostering discussion, democratic decision-making, monitoring edits. AI model should adopt similar standards from data sourcing, design decision, result interpretation to ensure diverse model outputs. As this industry evolves, commercial interest shouldn't be the sole guiding principle for these pivotal memory agents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julien, for this very dense lecture. Yes, we have a question here, at the front by Paul Ross, the director of the Image Center.
Thank you very much. I didn't find that abstract at all. I found it to be very precise, very specific. There's so many questions that one could ask, but one that I want to ask is at the heart of what you said at the outset, which is the inherent conflict, essentially a class divide that governs the future of AI. You know, the place that I operate is a fairly small entity within a larger entity, but nevertheless fairly small in the scheme of this commercial reality that we're talking about. And I think one of the challenges for me as I've started to wonder, well, how will we ever be able to use AI, is that, number one, in our field, beyond us, but this is true of our place as well, there is ever less emphasis on the collections that we all possess. The collections get larger and larger. The amount of work that we have to do to govern the copyright and other rights associated with the material is ever more complicated and beyond our reach. Meanwhile, an order of scale larger, these corporations have decided to utterly disregard the copyright restrictions. They have developed technical tools that allows them to vacuum up the vast storehouse of information, and often without regard to the legal risks, in order to activate or create tools that they can then rent or sell back to the population at large. How can we ever, as nonprofits, with the responsibility of stewarding these collections, having fewer staff than we ever had to govern these collections, having less money than ever before, and looking at an illiberal governmental wave that is spreading across the world? How can we ever imagine that we will have access to these tools? Do you see a future for AI for entities like ours?
Yeah, thank you very much for this really great and political question. I think what we're trying to do, for example, with pictorIA, for example, is to create a consortium with different stakeholders to get together precisely to be able collectively to answer this kind of question. Because that is what we've seen, I think, with the JSTOR and all the commodification of the research papers and the research periodicals, where you had a moment where a few really big companies got all the periodical, all the reviews and so on, and so they were in a position of monopoly to negotiate with different universities. But in the US, for example, the university got together and they became this big consortium that had power because they were a collective to discuss with the corporation. In Europe, we saw a different kind of answer, which is to say that at the European level, they decided that all research created and sponsored and financed through public money must be accessible to the public. So it kind of obligated the researcher to publish everything online on open access repositories and so on. And so it circumvented the big editors and the big corporation. I think we can do the same with AI. The problem is the problem of money, as you said, because they have huge amount of money. But this is a bubble. It will soon deflect. And so what we are seeing today is really something that 5 years from now, I'm pretty sure the landscape will be really different. People will say, okay, we can't just burn money to have a monopoly on and to be the first one there. And so people will use AI in much more traditional or to answer really specific problems that are, because now people want to do everything with AI. It's like, I've got friends saying me, okay, can you use AI to find all the italics in a collection of books and then make statistics on it? No, that is not what it works for. You are using it wrong. So we have too many power nowadays. In a few years, I guess there will be a sort of filtering, and I think the power struggle and the power dynamics will have changed also. I'm quite optimistic.
Wow, well balanced. Yes, we have a question here.
Thank you. Great talk. Really brought the elephant of politics into the room and announced it. Thank you. I have to tell a funny story before I ask my question, because when Terry was introducing the speakers and named you, your last name was interpreted on this translation screen as Schuh.
That's on me. That's definitely
It was
on.
wonderful. I just want to say I would add a D, a human shrewd. Thank you very much. It reminds me also that of an old political saying when I was growing up politically, the personal is political, and now we are saying the algorithm is political, and the who controls this and how it is controlled is of course fundamental. So you've described the problem very well, and anything else you can say about what you partly said in answer to Paul's question, what are the solutions? What can we do? And Wikipedia as a model is a very interesting one. It's also non-profit.
Yeah.
It's also a major source scraped by all of the learning models, etc.
Yeah.
So anything else you can say? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The extractivism is a big problem for everything that we are doing and everything that we put online. As researcher and archivist and the creators of this knowledge, I think really what Elinor Ostrom created as a framework to understand how to manage knowledge commons. She has all the answer, I guess. So just read her books, read her talks. The question is, being able to assess who has the right to access the kind of thing. How do we collectively define our own rules to create these things? But this is also a technological problem. And what we are doing now, we are seeing, and that is also something that we wanted to do with pictorIA, the consortium, is also to make people more, acculturate to the what AI is and how these models work. Because as long as people has a kind of mythical view of what these tools are, they are going to be used against them. Because when you think that these are some kind of magical object, some kind of, génie, les génies, no? Genies, okay. That can answer all of your question. You are not in a position to counter what you have in front of you. But when you are aware of how it works, and that's why I wanted to show how they were designed, what kind of data was behind them, and because there is, I talked about obfuscation, all these companies, they don't want you to know what's behind the models, how it really works, because the secrecy is part of their power. So as long as we don't have the secrecy, as we manage collectively to share this knowledge, I think we will be more resilient in front of these companies.
Thank you. Yes, we have one more question here.
Yeah, embracing AI either fully or partially going down the road, where would people who have limited access to computer or savvy, where would they fall on the spectrum?
Yeah, that is also a great question. That a question that we now see today with all digital tools, in fact, because we see a divide, a social divide, a geographical divide between how people can use the kind of tools. I'm also pretty optimistic with the way that we see more and more really small models, such as the one that Meta is doing, like really small llama models that can be used on smartphone and that are already really good at doing some basic tasks. And they are being refined daily. They are more and more powerful. And so I think in the near future, more and more people are going to use AI locally, in fact, not through platforms, because platformization is a problem. The fact that we interact with these tools through platforms and interfaces that we don't really understand, and we are not part of the discussion on how it works. But when you use AI locally, and that is why when I work with AI models, I mostly work on my own computer or on my smartphone with models that I know what they are doing. I don't send the information outside, and I can control all the aspects. It's also a political problem. So yeah, I think as long as we are having smartphone, and smartphone is something that a part of the ecological problems and so on that you have also, but you see them in the end of everyone. So the gap might be closed this way. Thanks.
Yes, yeah, Isabella has a question.
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that you actually brought in the discussion bit of the public and private into it, because this extends to the broader contours of actually all the software that we're using, and you know, the fact that there is such a thing as, you know, open source and open access, and within the archives and museum studies you have open GLAM. So, and I imagine that all of that is available to everybody. I guess a large part of this has to do with education. And I know that when I'm teaching here, not a lot of people, even students, know about alternatives to Microsoft software or to Google. To make matters worse, our universities here are actually using Google, the whole suite for email and for, you know, for file management. You know, my question is, because you're in France and Europe has been actually quite active in keeping Google and other companies in line, at the universities in France, is there more awareness or maybe encouragement to use open source and more publicly oriented sharing of data and also software?
This is a really complicated question. Thank you very much. The problem is that, for example, in my university, we use Google Drive. We have some, how do you say, constraint. For example, the servers must be in Europe. So we all use Google Drive. We know that the servers are not in the US where they could be spied on or something like that. So there is a few guidelines and restrictions. But for example, during COVID, the French government said to everyone, okay, now everyone should use the publicly available open source softwares that have been developed by French association, for example. But the problem was that these tools weren't scaled for these massive use. So for example, you've got, what's the name of the Zoom-like thing in, no, I don't remember, but yeah, you got this thing that was managed by a small association with a very few benevolent engineers, and all of a sudden, this small group had millions of people trying to use their tools to make class online at the same time, and everything crashed because it wasn't meant to be doing that. So the problem is putting your no, how you say, your eggs in your basket? No, that's not something. Yeah. Or no. Or no. That's not what. No. Or no. I mean no. Comment mettre l'argent là où on. Enfin, bref. Yeah. You see what I mean? Yeah. If you want this kind of tools to exist, you have to give money to the people who maintain them, because otherwise it won't work.
Great. Thank you very much.